There are people laughing, living lives we used to lead, chasing down the love they need. Somewhere in the night, tender is the night, and the benediction of the neon light. Tender, tender are the hunters, tender is the night. You're gonna want me tonight when you're ready to surrender. Forget about who's right when you're ready to remember. It's another world at night when you're ready to be tender. Tender, 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 tender. And in the heart light of an angry sun, no one remembers what was said or done. Tender are the words they choose. You win, I win, we lose. Tender, tender is the night, the benediction of the neon light. Tender, tender are the hunters, tender is the night when they hold each other tight. Tender, tender are the undercover, tender, the stranger and secret lover. Tender, tender are the motions, tender is the night when you hold your baby tight. Tender, 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 tender.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the TeleLeighton Webinar. Did a loved one suffer from a nursing home neglect or abuse during COVID-19 crisis? We will be talking about nursing homes and assisted living facilities and how they mistreat residents. To answer the question, do I or does a loved one have a case? This is the third of the Leighton Law Coronavirus Telewebinar series. The webinar will be recorded, and if you want a copy of the PowerPoint or any other information, please feel free to email us or request it in the chat on the bottom of the Zoom app. If you have any questions you would like asked, please type them in the chat box and we will ask them at the end. We will take up questions at the end of the presentation. Please mute your microphones. Today's webinar will feature Leighton Law Managing Partner John Leighton. Mr. Leighton is a board-certified trial lawyer and serves as the president of the National Crime Victim Bar Association. He is a frequent published author of books, book chapters, and articles, and speaks to lawyers and teachers around the country. He has lectured extensively on nursing home and medical malpractice cases, and has won some of the largest verdicts and settlements in Florida on a variety of catastrophic injury cases. He has chaired seminars and colleges on nursing home litigation in Hawaii, Houston, Phoenix, Austin, and Fort Lauderdale. Mr. Leighton brought the first lawsuit against the Rehabilitation Center at Hollywood Hills after a dozen residents of that nursing home died following Hurricane Irma 3 years ago. He has been selected for the best lawyers in America for more than over a dozen years. Selected as Florida Super Lawyer continuously since 2006, chosen as Florida Legal Elite by Florida Trend Magazine, Orlando Legal Elite by Orlando Style Magazine, and top lawyer in the South Florida Legal Guide for 17 straight years. He received the Daily Business Review Verdicts Hall of Fame Award in 2015 for a $24 million wrongful death verdict he won, and in 2017 was recognized by the American Lawyer Media Top 100 Verdicts Award for a $49 million verdict. Please welcome John Leighton.
Thank you. Welcome to the third of our TeleLeighton webinars. Today's topic is about nursing homes and assisted living facilities, and whether you or somebody that you know or love was affected through the COVID-19 crisis or otherwise by neglect or abuse at a nursing home. We're going to talk about nursing homes, what they offer, the problems that we tend to see. We've got 35 years of experience of handling cases against nursing homes and assisted living facilities. So we have some perspective of what we can expect, what kind of treatment, and what kind of bad outcomes there are. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll give you a few ideas on what we're seeing, what we're encountering, especially in light of the coronavirus pandemic. And we'll take questions. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, which by now, if you're not familiar with Zoom, you will become familiar. It's an important part of all of our lives. As I was saying to somebody yesterday, when I go to sleep after doing 4 to 8 Zoom meetings a day, after seeing all the little boxes, I feel like I'm looking at the Brady Bunch in the back of my eyelids every night. So we're going to start off. I'm going to share my screen with you. I'm going to use a PowerPoint, which, as we know, is great because we're all very visual. We're all visual. We're visual learners. We're visual thinkers. So let's start, first of all, with talking about our aging population. We've got a population that is continuing to get older and older. And although we don't ever age, because we all look in the mirror and say, hey, I still see that 16-year-old, 24-year-old, 30-year-old, whatever. On the whole, we're all aging. And the United States of America is growing older and older on the average each year. So that's partly a function of our times of zero population growth, but it's also creating some other interesting problems because we're having to use more assisted living facilities and nursing homes to care for our elderly. And that's just one of the realities of life. There are over 40 million people that are considered elderly in the United States today. And interestingly, because of our life expectancy, over 6 million people are 85 years old or older. And we all know a lot of 85-year-olds who are fully independent, still working, driving, traveling, doing everything. And then we know people who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who are bedridden or relying upon a nursing home. So there isn't always a rhyme or reason for that. But more and more people have to rely on nursing homes or assisted living facilities because of their condition, because of their age. Maybe they don't have family, maybe they can't be independent. And so, unfortunately, that leads to a lot more abuse and neglect of our elders. And senior abuse is a big problem in this country. It's something that tends to get overlooked. It doesn't tend to get enough popular attention in the news. But it's a measure of how we treat our most vulnerable population. Tells us a lot about ourselves as a society. And so you're going to hear me say this a few times, and I want you to take it seriously. Follow the money. Because in a capitalist society, and nobody here is suggesting that we change our form of government, our form of life, we're all capitalists, but in a capitalist society, following the money sometimes means care is neglected, money comes first, or as we like to say, it's profits over people. Okay. The statistics are not accurate, but we know at a minimum there are as many as 5 million people who suffer abuse in nursing home or assisted living facilities each year. Some form of abuse. Abuse can take a lot of forms, and we'll talk about some of the types of nursing home abuse that we see. One of the studies showed that 24% of nursing home residents suffer at least one instance of physical abuse. And physical abuse is defined as harm, physical harm to somebody that was not necessary as part of their care and treatment. It is tremendously underreported. Much like child sexual abuse, nursing home and assisted living abuse is underreported because the victims either can't speak up for themselves, they may not be able to verbalize, they may have limited cognitive ability, they may be medicated, they may be afraid to speak up. And there are a number of facilities, not just a few, but they span the entire country, where the caregivers are treating people in such a way that they live in fear for their lives. So let's look at a couple of the most common forms of abuse and neglect that we see in nursing homes, what is done to some of our seniors. The most common thing that we see that results in significant injury to people are falls. When we become older, our bones and our joints become much more fragile. They're much more susceptible to serious damage and fractures. And so as we see osteoporosis and other forms of bone degeneration, when somebody falls, and seniors have a greater chance of falling because of stability, weight, balance, lack of muscle, dehydration, and malnutrition, falls are kind of the end result of some of that abuse. And when an elderly person falls, the most common thing we see are fractured hips. And almost everybody has heard this of a friend, a relative, a neighbor, or read about it. When an older person suffers a fractured hip, very often that is the beginning of a slippery slope to the end, because they are less equipped to recover and bounce back. They are less able to handle surgery. They may not even be candidates for surgery sometimes. Sometimes they are left without a surgical alternative, so they have to remain bedridden, non-ambulatory anymore. Once somebody becomes non-ambulatory, meaning that they're bedridden, lots of bad things happen, including lack of circulation, lack of muscle tone. And that, again, is the beginning of a slippery slope of health deterioration. Elopement. Elopement, another name for wandering. It's when somebody who is in a nursing home facility leaves, just wanders away. Elopement can happen because of dementia, Alzheimer's, other altered mental states. It is supposed to be a never event, meaning it should never happen that somebody who's in a nursing home just leaves. There are many ways of preventing that from occurring. And if a nursing home is doing what they're supposed to do, it should be prevented. But when somebody who's in a nursing home who requires care does elope or leaves, bad things happen. They can fall, they can get involved in all sorts of abuse. It's not even, there are so many bad things that can happen. Neglect, that's just ignoring somebody who requires care, attention, which happens a lot. And we'll talk about the reasons why. Infections. When somebody's bedridden, they're particularly susceptible to infection. In order to prevent infections with good aggressive care by caregivers and medical providers, we can prevent or arrest most infections very quickly. But in some seniors that are in nursing homes, when they're neglected, they develop infections that are not treated right away. They develop into a worse infection, and they become septic or infected to the point where they can have very serious or life-threatening consequences. Malnutrition and dehydration occurs when people don't get the right amount of food, water, liquids. And that's particularly important in seniors because dehydration affects the brain, the ability to be coherent and cognizant. It affects skin tone, muscle tone. Same thing with malnutrition. And that leads to falls. It leads to problems with cognitive ability to communicate. So Uh, Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not intentional, sometimes it's neglect. That's why we use the terms abuse and neglect. But in either case, malnutrition and dehydration should not occur to our seniors in assisted living facilities or nursing homes. And it's something we see quite often. Another never event are bed sores. We call them bed sores. They're really pressure ulcers. And if somebody is left sitting in the same position without being turned for a period of time, they can develop a pressure sore that develops worse and worse and worse. There are different grades of it, to the point where it goes down to the bone. And it can become infected, and a person can become septic. These should not happen. With adequate care, somebody in a nursing home should not develop bed sores, but we see them all the time. Then there's physical abuse and sexual abuse, two different kinds. Sometimes physical abuse is a caregiver being abusive, pushing, hitting someone. People with Alzheimer's disease or dementia sometimes can be combative. You don't respond to a combative senior by hitting them. There are ways of caring for people who have these issues. And then there are some people who aren't combative, but you have malicious or sadistic caregivers. And when you're paying somebody minimum wage with very, very low education level, you can't always expect to have the best and the brightest caring for our seniors. Sexual abuse can occur either by a caregiver or by somebody else in the facility. Same thing with physical abuse. Sometimes we see cases where someone in the nursing home is assaulted, abused, or sexually abused by a roommate, somebody down the hall on another floor. These are all things that are preventable with proper care and proper staffing. Another very common abuse is over-medicating or under-medicating patients. So what happens sometimes is, in order to save money, nursing homes will not give a patient all their medication, will skip a dose, either because they want to save money on the medication and still bill for it, which is Medicare fraud, or because they want to just save money and keep in pocket what they're getting paid, or they don't want to bother with it, or they're understaffed. And we'll talk about understaffing shortly, but understaffing is at the core of most nursing home neglect and abuse. Or the flip side is over-medicating. And sometimes nursing homes over-medicate patients on purpose because it's a form of control. It's also a form of abuse. If you try to control a patient by medical manipulation, that's a form of abuse. That's drugging somebody. And that happens quite frequently. And then the last one I want to talk about is a lack of medical care. Some nursing homes fail to provide medical care, doctors to these patients, either doctors or nurses or ARNPs. And the only care that some patients get are by the nursing assistants, whether they're just off the street nursing assistants or they're CNAs, certified nursing assistants. But all patients of nursing homes need to see doctors on a regular basis, but it becomes expensive to the facility to either bring a physician in or have a patient transported by van or ambulance to a physician. And so once again, follow the money. Now, we're broadcasting from Florida today. I know we have some people from around the country. I'll talk a little bit about Florida, but most of this applies to every state. Now, Florida has some legal protections for residents of nursing homes. We have a resident bill of rights. It's codified in statute 429.28. Most states have some form of statutory protection or a bill of rights for nursing home or assisted living facility patients. Some of these are very broad, but they make sense. Everybody has a right to live in a safe environment when they're in any kind of a living facility. They're entitled to be free from neglect and abuse. Having said that, the Bill of Rights really has very little in the form of teeth, which is why the civil justice system is so important here. And that's why the lawyers who represent elders, the lawyers who represent people who are in assisted living facilities, it's so important for them to be aware of how to properly identify the kinds of abuse and neglect that we see, how to deal with the patients themselves, because they're not like somebody that we see every day. People who are in nursing facilities require a different level of care, understanding, communication. Sometimes we have to communicate only with family. Sometimes we can communicate with the patient, the client themselves. Every one of these cases is different. There are some warning signs of nursing home abuse that we should be looking out for. And sometimes this is obvious to the family and they come to us and talk about it. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we have to probe and ask them, have you seen any of this? Poor personal hygiene is one of the most common things. You might say, well, lots of people have bad hygiene. But when somebody is in a nursing home, they're supposed to be properly cared for, properly kept clean, bathed. Their personal hygiene is supposed to be taken care of. When that's not, that's a warning sign of neglect, that somebody is not paying enough attention to mom, dad, grandma, grandpa. Look at that. Unsanitary living conditions kind of flows from that. If the room or the facility, the bathroom is dirty, it's not kept up, that there's a greater chance of infection and of spreading infection, of all sorts of problems, and it's a symptom of a bigger problem. We mentioned malnutrition and dehydration. 20% of seniors in nursing homes have been found to be suffering from either malnutrition or dehydration. And because a lot of these people don't have the ability to speak for themselves, the care is so important. The observation by the nursing assistants, by the nurses. Look, if you're looking at a case, look to see whether they have nurses, what the ratio of nurses to nursing assistants are on any shift. There has to be a nurse on every shift. You can't just delegate this to untrained, low-income employees. There are a lot of people with wonderful skills, wonderful hearts that really do a very good job, that may or may not be highly skilled. But for the most part, when you put an unskilled, low-paid employee in charge of somebody doing the worst jobs, I mean, there have been a lot of discussions about for the same money, somebody could be frying a burger at Burger King, or they can be cleaning an adult diaper and wiping people down and putting in catheters and cleaning up urine. What would most people do? So think about that. We're not paying these people enough because it's all about the money. When I say we, I'm talking about the nursing home companies, the providers. But if 20% of the people in a nursing home are dehydrated or have malnutrition, they're at risk, they're being harmed. It's not good for their long-term likelihood of success. Their life expectancy is reduced. Their cognitive ability, their communication is reduced. It's a form of abuse. Lack of mobility. So if somebody goes into a nursing home or an assisted living facility and they're able to walk, and within days, weeks, or months, they're bedridden, they no longer walk, that's a sign that something's wrong. A lack of ambulation or mobility is the #1 factor in a very poor outcome, of a lack of life expectancy. People go downhill very quickly when they can't move around anymore. And injuries. Are there bruises? Are there signs of injury? Does the loved one say that somebody hit them or that they're hurt? Or do they, when a family member comes up to them, do they flinch? These are things to look for. Keeping in mind that there's a whole spectrum of cognitive ability of people that are in nursing homes. There are people that are just like you and me. They're in a nursing home because they have nursing needs, they have nursing care. They may not be mobile. They may be in a nursing home because of lack of mobility. They may have a medical condition. They may not have family or friends or places that they can go, but that they can't live independently. And then the other side of the spectrum is somebody who can't communicate, who may be incompetent, mentally incompetent. They're like infants. They need extra levels of care because they can't communicate what's wrong with them. They may not be able to communicate that they have pain that may be a urinary tract infection, whatever it might be. Look to see whether there are injuries or any signs of problems. And depression is another factor. A lot of people who go into nursing homes develop depression. If they have enough cognition, they're aware that this is that next step. And it can be very depressing. It can also be very lonely, very, very lonely, which is why we tell people that the #1 factor in a good outcome for people in nursing homes and assisted living facilities is having family visit them. We also know that people get much better care when they have family, friends, and relatives come visit them at the facility. Like the squeaky wheel that gets greased, people who have family come on a regular basis get much better care. The people who don't have anyone coming, they are essentially warehoused in many of these facilities. Well, what did I say was going to be one of the big themes here? Yep, follow the money. The money trail is always the most important thing. So what is the biggest cost to a nursing home provider or an assisted living facility provider? It's staff. And what is the best way to save money and increase profits is to reduce your staff. You can reduce staff by numbers. You can reduce staff by cutting the cost per staff member. So if you have an RN that might cost $30 an hour or $35 an hour, and you can put in a $10 or a $12 an hour assistant, you can make a lot more money. So if you're using cheap labor to staff your facility, okay, you can pay sometimes minimum wage, and those are the people that are there. You give them a polo shirt or a white uniform, and they're your staff. Some places really don't do training or hire untrained people. So if you have poorly paid untrained people, it's a bad problem. What's even worse, and we've seen this in case after case, is that facilities will misrepresent what their real staffing is. So they'll represent to state inspectors that they have a certain ratio of staff. They might say we have 3-to-1 ratio, or we have, on any given time, we have 12 staff on duty, when in fact the number is much, much lower. So in order to get caught, there has to be a surprise inspection. We've seen cases where they know that the inspectors are coming on Thursday at 2 o'clock, and they ramp up their staff that day. We even had one facility that they owned 2 or 3 nursing homes. On the days they knew they were going to have state inspectors, they would bring in their staff from the other facilities. Some of them even had staff that didn't work there at all. They would put up their diplomas in an office and make it look like they were there all the time. Just a complete fraud. This happens on a regular basis. So when we know that when we have inadequate staffing, we end up with poor care. With poor care, we end up with poor results, more abuse, more neglect. And one of the things we see is we see falls, we see accidents, we see medication isn't administered properly. When you have proper fall protection, when you identify patients who are at fall risk, there are many things you can do to prevent them from falling. But with poorly trained and inadequate numbers of staff, you're going to continue to have more falls. Now we turn to today's issue, the issue du jour. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard about the coronavirus. So what's the coronavirus effect on nursing homes and assisted living facilities? Even if you were one of the families that went and visited your loved one all the time at the nursing home, you can't now. Nobody's allowed to go into nursing homes or hospitals. So there are a lot of effects of that. First of all, people who need that kind of connection don't have it. So there's a greater increase in depression. People are dying, and they're dying alone. Everybody today, regardless of whether you have coronavirus, a heart condition, old age, atherosclerosis, people die alone. Right now, everybody dies alone, which for many people is the greatest fear that they possibly can have. I mentioned this before. When you have family visiting, you get better care. So what happens now? Nobody's family's visiting. What happens to the care? We don't know. We're not inside the facilities. Nobody gets to see inside. With oversight, more people, you get better care. Now we know with coronavirus, there's less oversight. And you throw onto that, you have lower staff because of coronavirus. People don't want to leave their homes, even though it's an essential industry. people aren't coming to work, they may have caught coronavirus. One of the things we know about nursing homes and ALFs is that they're hotbeds for coronavirus. People get coronavirus, they get COVID-19, and it spreads like wildfire through these facilities. Just like in a jail, people are in close contact. You've got people going from one person to another. So if you have a nursing assistant that's caring for patient A and goes to patient B, unless they do an absolute thorough cleaning, decontamination, they change their gloves, they change their PPE, they wash frequently, you've got a much higher risk of spreading the COVID-19. And again, we're talking about underpaid, undereducated, undermotivated employees. So the other thing is, many nursing homes and ALFs didn't even have any real protocols for coronavirus. So they were allowing people to come in and go out. They didn't have standardized protocols, either for hand washing, for disinfecting, for PPE, personal protection equipment. They really didn't have anything for a long time. And we saw a lot of nursing homes develop major clusters of COVID-19. And unfortunately, these are the most vulnerable people for COVID-19. The chance of somebody that's in a nursing home surviving COVID-19 is very small. These are the most vulnerable people in society, more vulnerable than young children and infants, because one of the things that has come out from a virus we know very little about, a virus that we didn't know existed 6 months ago, one of the things we know is that it attacks older cells at a much stronger and greater rate, which is why the elderly are at much greater risk for death from coronavirus. Now, unfortunately, we know that nursing homes tend to get involved in cover-ups. We see this time and time again. The nursing home industry has been rife for abuse, neglect, cover-up. The financial incentives are too great. The oversight is too small. I'll get into this in a little bit about what Florida has done. What I really mean is hasn't done. There's very little oversight, real oversight. We do now have a new rule in Florida that just came out. It's actually not just Florida. Nursing homes have to alert residents and their families or their representatives within 12 hours of a confirmed case of COVID-19 in the facility. They're supposed to tell the CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, within 72 hours when there's been a cluster of 3 or more people who have developed respiratory symptoms. The idea here is to be able to identify hotspots quickly, isolate it, do contact tracing, and stop it. This is a brand new measure that just came out from the Center, CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. We'll see if this has any effect in arresting the spread of COVID-19 in nursing facilities and ALFs. One of the problems is you see a lot of game playing when it comes to nursing homes, and they play shell. There's a shell game going on. I'm bringing up some slides from a tragedy that made national news 3 years ago. The rehabilitation center in Hollywood Hills, there were between 12 and 14 people that were killed after Hurricane Irma. The reason why I bring it up is this is a classic example of the nursing home shell game. This facility was responsible for at least a dozen. A dozen have been determined to be homicides. There are as many as 14 or 18 that may also be homicides as well. The facility didn't move people out of the nursing home after the hurricane and the air conditioning went dead. They were literally within 50 yards of a major metropolitan hospital, didn't move the patients, because the minute they left the bed, they can no longer bill Medicare the $150 a day or whatever it is that they were getting per bed, per patient. And so if they moved one to the hospital for that reason, they'd have to move everybody to get them out of the facility because the temperatures were rising into the triple digits. So it was a slippery slope from a financial perspective. Now, from a human perspective, nobody should have been left in that building. People were dying from heat exhaustion. These were people that were, as long I represented one woman's family, she was 99 years old. Nobody can withstand that. And so we filed the first lawsuit against this facility. We went on to represent a number of other families in this. But the reason why I mentioned about the shell game, what the public doesn't know, because the public it doesn't hit the public until it happens to them or a member of their family, is that this nursing home carried a total of $35,000 of insurance. $35,000 worth of insurance for a major nursing home, because Florida doesn't require having real liability insurance. And then to make matters worse, this nursing home, which was owned by a shell company that was owned by another hospital, the owner of which is a doctor who just buys up facilities, guts them, and then makes money off of them. In fact, he's already in trouble now with coronavirus for charging $250 or so for coronavirus testing when it was supposed to be free. That's why we talk about the shell game, the companies that are formed to protect the owners. Sometimes there's very little we can do for financial, to obtain financial recompense. Now we're seeing something that's as bad or worse. It's been referred to as the COVID-19 power grab. You can call it anything you want, but what it is this powerful industry lobbying group, the nursing home operators, have been slipping in to some of the financial aid bills immunity for this industry, so that they will not be held accountable and have no incentive to provide the kind of care to prevent our residents, our seniors, our parents, our grandparents from contracting COVID-19. It's really sad, and it's reality. New York has already passed an immunity. They slipped it into the finance bill, the budget bill. This is right out of the New York Times. I think this is today's New York Times. Don't try suing them, according to the New York Times. They've calculated that some 5,300 nursing home residents have died of COVID-19. 5,300 in New York alone. But you can't sue them in New York because they got this pushed into the bill in immunity. 15 states have given some kind of immunity or protection to the industry as cover for COVID-19. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is trying to create an immunity for all healthcare providers, including nursing homes, in exchange for the stimulus bill that's being proposed, the next stimulus bill. They've been trying to do this for years, and McConnell sees an opening now for his golden goose, the lobbyist for the nursing home and healthcare industries. It's going to be a huge fight, and they're using this as an excuse. It's pretextual in nature, and all it's doing is taking away the rights of our families, ourselves, and it's basically giving a green light to the industry to not care. They're doing the same thing here. They're trying to in Florida. Okay, I don't know if you can see these, but the governor is talking about this. Florida still covers up for nursing homes. Florida has talked a good game. Florida has more seniors, more nursing homes than anywhere else. Doesn't matter. For months, the state of Florida refused to even identify the nursing homes where there were COVID-19 cases. The Miami Herald and other news outlets had to go to court to try to find, by public records, what were the facilities where there were COVID-19 infections. The state refused to turn it over. Finally, after enough public pressure, they finally turned some of this over. They also were having medical examiners withhold causes of death to change the statistics so that it didn't look like there were as many coronavirus cases in Florida. This is where we are today. This is why we have our public, we are so polarized at this point. Of course, people have less of a belief and trust in their government. When you see this coming from both Washington and here in Tallahassee in Florida, you've got manipulation of statistics. So what does that mean for nursing homes? if you change the statistics, it doesn't look as bad. And the nursing homes claim, well, we're doing a really good job, when in fact, we know that they're hotspots. We know that they're rife with infection. We don't have very strong regulations, but the ones that we do have are not enforced. For instance, years ago, there was a compromise bill, and they were supposed to have higher staffing ratios in the nursing homes in exchange for letting the nursing home operators have a bunch of concessions. That's never been enforced by the state of Florida. Similarly, after the deaths in Hollywood Hills that we talked about earlier, the state instituted a rule that all nursing homes had to have a generator and be able to get their air conditionings running for at least 72 hours after a hurricane. That's not been enforced. Most of the nursing homes fail to comply with that even today, 3 years later, because there's no accountability, there's no penalties, nothing is done. So if I say that there's a rule, a law, but there's no enforcement of it, why do it? If I tell you that the speed limit is 50 miles an hour, but you know that there isn't a cop on the street, you can go 75, 80, 100 miles an hour. There's no cops around. And what this says to us is that the state doesn't value these lives. They don't see them as big voters. If you're in a nursing home or an ALF, are you voting? Are you in large numbers? Do you have a lobby? Who lobbies for people in nursing homes? The only lobby are groups like the trial lawyers who represent victims, and maybe AARP. Here are a couple of examples. Our governor in Florida, rejecting a test for nursing homes, doesn't want to give the nursing home data out publicly. They wanted to test all people in elder care, everybody in ALFs and nursing homes. Governor didn't want that. Failure to disclose, refusal to share information with the public, okay? What possible reason could there be? You have to ask yourself that. So why would you need a lawyer? Why would your loved one need a lawyer if they were in a nursing home? Well, there are a bunch of reasons why, and I'll go through it quickly. And by the way, there are a lot of very good, highly qualified trial lawyers out there who represent seniors and elders. We're fortunate that we have a very good trial bar in the state of Florida. Make sure that if you're considering hiring a lawyer because of an elder abuse or nursing home neglect case, you make sure that these are people that are experienced and have a good track record in representing victims of nursing home abuse and neglect. But there are a lot of good lawyers in this state. There's a lot of complexity in the law. It's a very complex statute that governs nursing home and assisted living care facilities. And the statute changes and the case law changes with it. There are arbitration clauses, notwithstanding my typo in this PowerPoint. There are a lot of times when people bring their families to nursing homes or assisted living facilities, they have to sign an agreement. And that agreement may include an arbitration clause. It may also include a waiver of a right to jury trial. So as a condition for putting your mother, your father, your grandparent in a facility, you might have to give up the right to a jury trial. But you have to talk to a lawyer and see if that is in fact valid. And maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. As I mentioned earlier, in Florida, it's a big problem. There's limited insurance coverage. So you have to find what insurance might exist for the facility and all the people that are involved in the care. Are there any immunities? Right now, one of the things that the industry is trying to get Florida to do is to make nursing home and ALFs, give them the same immunity that the government has, which is what's called sovereign immunity. It limits the ability to be sued, it caps the damages, and in some circumstances, it prevents you from even having a right to sue. And then if a lawyer is going to be the one to help you figure out if there's a shell game going on between the corporations that own, operate, and finance the nursing home. There's a lot of game playing that goes on in the litigation itself, the motions that are filed, the attempts at dismissing the case, moving the case venue. So why would it be important to get a trial lawyer involved early? Well, some of these are obvious. You want to preserve all the evidence that's available because that stuff goes away quickly. You want videotape, photographs, if there are any, before they're recorded over. Sometimes there are security cameras that are used. You want to have the records reviewed by qualified personnel and experts. You want to do that early. In somebody who's alive, who hasn't passed away, age is an issue. If the goal is to help this person either get out of that nursing facility, become independent, get to another facility, or provide them some financial measure of assistance before they pass, time is a big issue. And the defense knows this. It used to be, and it still is, that they'll play run out the clock, and they'll do everything they can to drag their feet, hoping that the person passes away during the course of the litigation. This goes on all the time. We see it in almost every elder case. We do have a statute in Florida that allows us to advance the case on behalf of somebody who's elderly. So we can move the case up and move it faster. We can get a higher priority for getting a jury trial, but there's still a certain amount of time that every party is allowed to conduct their discovery. Plus, you put on top of that now with the coronavirus pandemic, there are no jury trials in Florida now. We might not see jury trials for quite some time, which brings up a whole other issue that we don't necessarily have to deal with today. You want your lawyers to identify the people involved, all the witnesses, anybody who might have any knowledge, and get statements from them. Or if they're employees of the facility or are uncooperative, get a deposition from these important witnesses. But until you file suit, you don't have subpoena power and you can't take depositions. Also, lawyers are very adept at getting state inspectors involved. In Florida, we also have an office of an ombudsman for nursing home and assisted living facilities. And because they don't comply with the statutory laws and the regulations, using that information and that law in a civil case can be very helpful. You're probably not going to be able to get the state to do anything to enforce their own rules. What do we see after COVID-19? We're still going to see coronavirus spread after the initial pandemic, after the initial emergencies. We're still going to see the industry take advantage of its financial strength and its power. It has a very big lobby, a very strong lobby in this state and others. The only way that we ever get corporate America to change their behavior is through lawsuits, the civil justice system. That's really the only way that we get any real change for safety in this country. And we have to ask ourselves, how is it that we provide a sense of respect for the lives of our senior citizens? How do we do that? How do we protect those people who are the absolutely most vulnerable in society? It's through the civil justice system and by allowing, bringing these cases and helping out the families who have suffered. So one of the questions that people ask us is, do I have a case? Or does my father or grandmother have a case? And we try to answer those one at a time. I know we have a couple of questions.
Yes, we do. So the first question is, every time I visit my dad at the nursing home, he seems like he's out of it. They say he's always like that. I don't think so. I'm not sure if he's really him. He wasn't like that before he got here.
Well, that's a common problem. It's very easy for the nursing homes to tell families, your dad is just aging. This is what happens. Or he's just doing poorly. He's not responding well. A lot of times what they're doing is over-medicating people. That sounds like an over-medication issue. You control your population by medicating. It's something that authoritarian countries have done for years, especially with prisons and mental health facilities. They'll put people in asylums and keep them medicated. Well, if you keep your senior citizens medicated, heavily medicated, they don't complain. They don't need as much attention. They're not walking. It's a great way to keep them from getting up and walking and falling is to just medicate them. In order to keep people healthy, if they're capable of walking and ambulating, whether it's on their feet, with a cane, with a walker, that's what keeps people alive. You have to keep the blood circulating, circulatory aspects of the physiology, bone density by keeping people up on their feet. You keep their bones strong, you keep their minds working. But when you start medicating people to control them or to save money, you don't need as many assistants. You don't need nursing assistants to come and check on somebody who's asleep 23 hours a day. You feed them occasionally. They tend to get malnourished, dehydrated that way. So I would say to you, with regard to your father, go and have your father checked. Get your doctor to see your father. Have blood tests done. See if have a toxicology workup done to see what medications and what levels are in his blood. If he has medication in his blood that wasn't prescribed, that's a big red flag. If it was prescribed, find out who prescribed it and why. And was it prescribed but at a higher level? Are they overdosing? All of these things you need to ask, but it's a serious question. Are there any other questions? Anna?
Yes. If my mother is in a nursing home and falls, who is responsible?
Another good question. It really depends on the fall, how the fall happened, who was around. Was your mother a fall risk? Whenever a patient is brought to a nursing home, they have to be assessed to see what their fall risk potential is. There's a whole number of things that are done to assess people and to figure out, are they at great risk for fall? If they're at risk for fall, there are things that are supposed to be done at the facility. Everything from putting bed rails up, having a greater number of nursing assistants there, providing ability for patients to contact and communicate so they can push a button and communicate with the nurses, a whole slew of things. But if they didn't do fall risk protection and she fell, they may be responsible. Even if they did fall risk protection, did they execute on it? What went wrong? Why did she fall? Was she walking in the hallway? Did she fall out of bed because the bed rails weren't up? Did nobody respond to her call for help because she needed to use the restroom? Was there some other reason? And these are the things we see over and over and over again. These falls should not be happening.
We have 2 more questions. How far off is the immunity vote?
Well, I don't know right now. There's no vote that's set right now. In the U.S. Senate, Mitch McConnell has been trying to push this through, and we don't have a time when that's going to happen. They're still meeting, negotiating, fighting. We don't know what will happen, and we don't know whether the House would, even if the Senate voted in favor of it, whether the House would. They're trying to leverage the stimulus bill and make it look like if you don't pass this, you're anti-American, you're not going to let people get the money in their pocket. In the state of Florida, we just don't know. We'll have to wait and see when and if it comes up for any kind of a vote. I don't think under the Florida Constitution, the governor has the right to do that without the House and the Senate passing it.
And the last question, are nursing homes and assisted living facilities the same?
They are not the same, but they are held to very similar standards. And bringing a case against a nursing home or assisted living facility in Florida requires virtually the same type of procedure and standards. Some assisted living facilities effectively are nursing homes. A lot of them have a nursing side and a more independent living side. It really depends on the level of acuity that's required of the patient. They both have very similar structures. Nursing homes require greater acuity level, more staffing, which is why in some circumstances the facilities try to push people off into their ALFs instead of nursing homes. On the other hand, they get paid more by having people in the nursing home side. They make more off of Medicaid, Medicare, and private health insurance. Any other questions?
That's it.
Well, I appreciate your attention. We do have another webinar coming up next week, which is about COVID-19 claims for businesses if they have lost income, business losses, extraordinary expenses, whether their business income policies will pay them. we're happy to help out with that, to talk about that. That's next week's seminar. I hope this has been helpful to you. If you need anything, if you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, if you want any other information, feel free to email us. You can go to our website. You can contact us directly, and we'd be happy to share information with you. Anything else you need, contact us. We'll be here. And thank you for being with us for the TeleLeighton webinar.